Well, Daniel Davis joins us from Washington. He's a retired lieutenant colonel with the U.S. Army. He himself was deployed into combat zones 4 times in his career. He's now a senior fellow and military expert with Defense Priorities. It's a nonprofit military think tank. Thanks so much for joining us, sir. Really appreciate your time.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Russian forces pushing forward in Mariupol. They're pummeling that steel plant where Ukrainian fighters are making what is determined to be their last stand. This while intense fighting continues across the east. Ukrainian counteroffensive we're telling you about in Kharkiv. Are we seeing any breakthrough at any point in this, and particularly in the Donbas?
Well, it's very interesting kind of what's happening all together. So Mariupol is effectively under Russian control now. The Azovstal steel plant is the only place where there are any Azov battalion forces that are still have not surrendered, but they don't have any capacity to launch any attacks. So it's really kind of a one-sided deal. And Russia has actually redeployed a number of thousands of their troops who were investing Mariupol now to the southern shoulder of the Donbas pocket that's forming in there. On the northern side, what Russia has been trying to do is to have a modest supporting effort in Kharkiv to hold the Ukrainian troops up there so they can't redeploy back to help their side. So what they're trying to do is to counteract that and then conduct an offensive to force Russia to do the opposite and to pull troops up. Now, so far, it appears that Russia is really kind of making that a minimalist operation. So they're not sending, they're basically saying, we're going to allow you to go a little bit of distance, but not too much, because the Ukrainians don't have enough force to keep going. But they are putting a lot more pressure on the northern shoulder of the Donbas pocket. And actually, in the last 3 or 4 days, they've made a number of significant successes. And they placed one town called Popasnia. And now then they're in the outskirts and actually more toward the middle of Severodonetsk, which then puts Lysychansk at risk. And if they take either one of those, then there's a large pocket of maybe 8,000 to 10,000 Ukrainian troops that are at risk of being cut off. So that's the real race right now, because if that falls, then the whole Donbas starts to be a problem for Ukraine.
We have heard virtually from the very beginning of this consistent messaging that the West needs to deliver even more foreign tanks, artillery, and the training that has to go along with that. And many Western countries, of course, have stepped up and begun that process. But is this the answer? Is this the offensive strength that Ukraine needs at this point?
Well, you say the answer depends on which question's being asked. Obviously, if you're being attacked, you need any and everything you can get. I mean, you'll literally throw the kitchen sink in there if it's going to have any chance to stop the onslaught. But really the only thing that can be realistically done right now is that for Ukraine to try and hold the line, to try to prevent that encirclement that I'm talking about in the Donbas there, to try to prevent any armor breakthroughs. So basically, they're shooting for a stalemate in the Donbas, because the alternative is that Russia makes a penetration and could literally surround the entire Donbas battle force, which is somewhere around 40,000 to 50,000 Ukrainian troops. And if they succeed there, then the whole thing, the whole defense could come undone. But in terms of getting that offensive capability in there, weapons from the United States, from Britain, from Germany, all kinds of other, Poland, sending tanks and whatever, we need to have a sober understanding that to form an offensive capacity that could actually unseat Russia and move it out, you're talking somewhere between 9 months to a year at the absolute earliest and under the best conditions. And right now, those conditions don't exist. So the fight right now is just to prevent them from being destroyed in the Donbas. And that's going to be a tall order. We just need to be clear on that.
Those are some sobering realities to try to understand in this. All morning we've been leading with the fact that the victory parade was held in Moscow. We heard from Putin. He blamed the West for the conflict. But we didn't hear about any escalation in tone, about him declaring total war or conscription or any of the other factors that many said he might try to do on this day, or even declare any kind of a victory. So what does this say about Russia's intentions at this point?
Yeah, no, I never expected him to do that. I thought that would be not in keeping with what he had been doing and what he'd been saying, and in the spirit of the whole May 9th Victory Day anyway. The idea is to celebrate the World War II victory, and I figured that probably what he would do would be to highlight the sacrifices that are necessary, to have those kinds of victory, and to say, hey, to try to connect that victory with what he claims is coming next. And that's exactly what he did say, that would ultimately be the case, don't question it, etc. But it would have been weird for him to try to claim victory because they didn't have it. There was nothing that other than this Mariupol, which is still not complete. And I think it would have rang hollow even to his supporters if he had tried to do that. So he was kind of constrained in how far he could go. But on the ground, I mean, they are clearly pulling out all the stops. And it's also noteworthy, I think, the fact that he didn't announce a mobilization, or at least he didn't today. That could come later. But that probably implies that he believes that he can take the Donbas with the force he has, because if he thinks that they're not going to succeed, then you can look for him to make mobilization and bring up another 30 to 50,000 troops. But until that time, I think he's going to try to take it with what he has.
All right. As you say, a lot of question marks there, but others are suggesting too, though, depending on what back and forth victories and losses might take place in what part of the country, that we could end up with some kind of stalemate scenario. And potentially then that could bring both sides to the table to discuss some kind of peace. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I've been advocating that, and I mean literally since day one, from the beginning. I was outspoken in the months before this that there was a negotiated end that could have prevented a war from happening at all. There was talk, even into March, on March 29th with the Istanbul meeting, where it looked like both sides had the general agreement. And then here comes the Donbas fight, and now then both sides think they can win, and now no one's willing to talk. But at some point, I think that they're going to have to recognize that this will end in a negotiated settlement. And the longer either side tries to get a military victory, I think it's just going to drag it out and raise the casualty counts on both sides. So I think that once this Donbas fight's finished, I think that you're going to see one or maybe both sides a willingness to talk again.
All right. That's given us a lot to think about and to anticipate in this. Sir, I want to thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis is a senior fellow and military expert with Defense Priorities, and he's in Sterling, Virginia.